Science Headliners. Please welcome our host from Linda Hall Library, Vice President for Public Programs, Eric Ward.
I'm honored to be joined today by astronaut, photographer, and author Dr. Roberta Bondar. In 1992, Dr. Bondar flew into space as a payload specialist on Space Shuttle Discovery during the STS-42 mission, where she became the first neurologist in space and Canada's first woman in space. Dr. Bondar is also a professional fine arts photographer and the author of several books, including her latest book, Space for Birds, Patterns and Parallels of Beauty in Flight. Dr. Bondar, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I love your book. My interest as a hobbyist are birds, space, and nature photography. So when I saw that you had published this is the perfect book for me.
I got it all covered for you.
Exactly. Your book takes a deep dive into the habitats and migrations of the lesser flamingo and the whooping crane. Why did you decide to focus on these two species?
There are a number of reasons, and I'll try to be brief.
Sure.
Basically, I wanted to focus on, for this book, two of a number of species we're following, and these two were indicative of birds that are endangered in the case of the whooping crane, and they're threatened in the case of the lesser flamingo. Also, as an astronaut, you kind of like to divide the Earth up a bit. So one is Western Hemisphere and one is Eastern Hemisphere. And the other thing, they have different behaviors. One is more solitary, the whooping crane, and the other was flock behavior, the lesser flamingo. But also, I worked with the United Nations Environment Program to identify some species, and the lesser flamingo was one that they came up with at the top of their list. And then North America, we have for many years had international collaboration between Canada and the United States to try to bring back the population, the wild population of whooping cranes that fly 4,200 kilometers from the Northwest Territories down to Texas. So that was another reason. And a big reason for me was I could see them from the air. It's not like the wonderful songbirds. They're very hard to see from the air, and I don't want to get too close. So I wanted to be able to capture landscapes. My original training in photography profession was in California, the Brooks Institute, and I wanted to use the whole aspect of arts to make images very attractive. And so to be able to take aerial images and have a bird in it, in the environment, and to be up high enough not to scare them, to take these artistic palettes, these canvases of the habitat, which is also the strength of the book, as well as more intimate portraits with a different type of camera on the ground, was really attractive to me. And then, of course, there are the space images.
Yeah, you mentioned some of those perspectives of your photographs. You have surface, aerial, and space photographs in the book. Was that an aesthetic choice that began from your space days, your space flight days?
Yes, truly, it did. My space flight, for a lot of people going into space, and regardless if it's more than a minute or more than a day, for example, people look at the Earth perhaps differently from space for sure. And when they get back to the planet on the surface, it's hard not to think about some of the things that one sees when one's in space. And for me, there were basically three things that I saw when I looked out the window. Number one was this beautiful seemed iridescent, but of course it's the sunlight reflecting back from the planet, this beautiful blue Earth below, and these patterns that I hadn't recognized before my flight. And I had spent a lot of time with Earth observation trying to look at patterns. So that was really intriguing. And the second thing was to actually see that Earth is a planet. We will learn about it in school, but to actually viscerally be there and see It is a planet. And then the third thing is to look beyond the Earth and see this infinite black. It's a black that I can't describe. I try to say it's a light-sucking black. It's a black that takes one's breath away because one can't fathom it with human vision for sure. And even with telescopes, it's really hard to imagine. Stars don't twinkle. So it was those three things that combined to make it a huge experience for me.
Your career has been at the intersection of art and science, and your latest book, Space for Birds, is just a great example of that. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on that intersection of art and science and kind of the importance of how each one complements the other?
Absolutely. I mean, back in the day when we think about Leonardo da Vinci and all the things that he did and the inventions he had and his drawings, and I mean that was the days obviously way before the computer, and we have tended over the years and decades separated art and science in a way that people have a longing to try to find this intersection of the two when they both need each other. And so there's always science and art, as far as I'm concerned. There's always art and science. People can't be creative scientists and come up with great experiments and understanding of the world and what questions to ask unless there is some grasp of science somewhere or art somewhere. And the same with arts. I mean, art's really, one's empowered if one knows a color wheel, for example, and how hues work and secondary colors, etc. If you're a painter or a drawer, and proportions. And even if you're an abstract painter, one needs to think about the human visual system and what appeals to us and what catches our interest. And that's what I feel that we should be doing more with science and art, is to look at the strengths that we have from different forms of art. It doesn't have to be on a canvas. It can be music. It could be anything that stimulates the brain to tap into those areas that are remarkable in its memory, to inspire and develop new ideas and new creative approaches to things. So I believe that science brings that for us. So what I was trying to do with this book was to try to have that intersection, to have these more artistic canvases. And once I could capture people's attention and draw them into the image, then they would be asking questions inside the image, which science can provide at least some of the answers.
You certainly have accomplished that, in my opinion. Your photographs certainly draw a person in, and it's you can spend a lot of time looking just looking at the images. It's just the beauty of the images.
Thank you.
Now, the title of your book, Space for Birds, is also a research project within your foundation, right? The Roberta Bondar Foundation. Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about can you talk a little bit about the mission of the foundation and the Space for Birds research project?
The mission of the foundation is fairly simple. It's to connect and reconnect people to the natural world. That's what I wanted to do after my space flight. I didn't see life on the planet. In fact, the only life that we can see with the corrected, unaided human eye is the Great Barrier Reef. And hopefully it will last a little bit longer for sure. So that not seeing life and certainly not hearing life from space, not hearing the sounds unless you have them taped, but then it's not real time. Not hearing bird sounds, bird song, those kinds of things to me. I mean, you can talk about wind rustling and rain falling and all the kind of things that we have in our memories that make life important and interesting on the planet. But I just felt that the foundation, if I could set one up, and I basically it bears my name, but the individuals who believe in different programs to draw students in, for example, in schools and students that don't have the same kind of opportunities as other students that are disadvantaged, to take them into the natural world and to show them different kinds of greens and to show them what a leaf looks like. And only then talk to them about how do you share this with somebody else. And we talk about the emotional impact that a photograph can take, because I always say you don't know what I'm thinking. You may think that my eyes are looking at something, but they may not be looking at what your eyes are looking at. So my background in neuro-ophthalmology before my flight really helps me now try to help students communicate what they see and what they found attractive in the natural environment, to try to share that excitement with somebody else, whether it's a bird, a leaf, a mushroom, even a stone on the beach, something that brings them and draws them in and helps them connect with their sensitivity to the natural world, for example.
It's that small thing that may spark an interest that will continue through their lifetimes.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, I'm always amazed at astronaut biographies. I'll run through your just brief resume quickly. You have a BS in zoology and agriculture, a master's in experimental pathology, a PhD in neurobiology, and a medical doctorate. And aside from flying in space, you're also a certified scuba diver, you're a skydiver, and a pilot, probably several other things. As a young girl, did you always have an adventurous spirit and an interest in science and nature, or was there a moment or an experience where the light bulb went off and you said, aha, this is what I want to do?
Actually, neither of my parents was or is or was now a scientist. In fact, they grew up. They were born in 1915 and 1917. My dad and my mother, respectively. So they grew up in the time of the Great Depression. They grew up in the time of World War II, and heavily influenced by the society in those days. And of course, there was no money in the family. So they worked very hard at things. My mother always liked sharing. She always wanted to be a teacher, but they didn't have money at that time to go to school. Later on in life, she got her bachelor's degree and became a high school teacher, and just really enjoyed the experience of sharing things. My dad was very technical. And so when it came, I remember in well, leading up to grade six, it could have been grade five. My mind's a little fuzzy about those days, but I have on my shelf things to remind me. I always look at, when I want energy, I kind of look at some of the things I had when I was a kid. And one of them was the original book that my parents uh, let me buy one book at the school display. And so I picked the Golden Guide to the Stars.
Oh,
And so I
nice.
was able to do some projects on that. My parents were always taking us down to the library. My mother was very, very curious, and because she liked teaching, she wanted to learn herself to be able to pass that knowledge on. So we had excursions, and in those days, because I'm from Sioux, Canada, we never thought nothing. I mean, my grandfather's American, and we were over the river all the time, back and forth, back and forth. Never thought anything of the fact there was a difference in the two countries, except for the parks. The park system in Michigan and Wisconsin were wonderful. The ones in Ontario, not so much. They hadn't even finished the Trans Canada Highway in those days. So we always went into the United States for our camping and life experience. And it was that kind of thing. The tenting, we had a tent, a World War II tent that my dad was able to pick up with
The old
at
green
a good
canvas
price.
tent.
Yeah, it was so old. It was a white silk tent. I mean,
Oh, okay.
it's almost like it was left over from World War One. But it was we did then migrate to a canvas tent, and all those adventures helped us connect with science. It helped us have understand how to go and look up information and know that it wasn't really just enough to see a butterfly, but you really had to know what that butterfly was, what that butterfly ate, where that butterfly went in the winter. Those were the kinds of curiosity things that my mother certainly provided, and my dad provided the technical support to be able to get there.
That's a great story. What advice do you have for a young student out there today who is interested in a STEM career?
I would, I mean, there are a couple of, well, there's more than a couple of things, but obviously never lose the sense of curiosity, because that gets us through life. No matter, I mean, even now, if I'm not curious about something, that I probably won't pick up a book or look online to get more information. So curiosity is a cornerstone of who we are, and we should never, ever lose that. And in spite of some negative things that people might say around us, just stick with that in your support system. And then I think I'd move into diversity of experience and diversity of education. I have a plethora, as you enumerated earlier, but the idea of combining some courses that one wouldn't normally think about. And I feel very strongly about communication. I took communication courses as an undergraduate, and those are the kinds of things that have led me on, not just in the astronaut program and as a physician and as a scientist, but on a day to day basis with other people. People shy away from science, but they really want to know. And a
Right.
person who goes through science and through STEM is really has this responsibility to be able to communicate those kinds of ideas and that kind of engagement, that enthusiasm. So that those are just a few of the things that I would say.
Okay, yeah, that's great advice. Now, getting back to the book for one more question, are you hopeful about the populations of the lesser flamingo and especially the whooping crane that
Yeah,
10,
it's
15, 20 years from now will they still have a stable population?
I would hope that there will continue to be people through the generations that will understand what conservation means and to try to engage other people. I mean, it's one thing we really want to get people to vote, for example,
Right.
and it's not 100% of people who vote. We try to get people to have some type of literacy, and we're not at 100% doing that. When we think about conservation of a life form that's not a human being, sometimes it's a hard sell, but nonetheless, it's they're parallel lives and they dovetail with us, as if parallel lines could ever do that. But if parallel lines are wide enough, they can overlap, and they do overlap, and people don't recognize that. So I think that in generations to come, we have to understand that we can't keep a narrow focus of just looking at human life, because human life is very dependent, whether it's good mental health or physical health, social health, or environmental health. We depend on natural systems to do this and keep the planet safe for human beings. So we would abandon it at our peril. And things like the whooping crane, or species like the whooping crane and the lesser flamingo, they're there to remind us as well that there are things out there from which we can still learn extraordinary things. There are creatures that teach us things now, and we can incorporate them in technology. We try to mimic them, and we're not very good at some of it, but some
Mhm.
of the things we learn from science is ongoing. And we just to have a species go towards extinction, which a lot are doing on the planet now. It's difficult sometimes to be happy about what human beings do unless one is actually doing something to try to counter it in even some small way, because those small ways build up and they become big ways.
Sure. Yeah. And just it's important work that you're doing. I'm so glad that you published this book. It was just a fascinating read. Now, right now it's time for my three for the road. Just three quick questions. Give me the first thing that comes to mind. First question, what is your favorite birding destination that you have visited? If you would recommend to someone, if you like birds, if you like nature, you have to go here. What would that be? If you had to pick one.
Yeah, I would pick a shoreline. If people want to see a lot of birds quickly, any shoreline would be a place to go. And I specifically at the moment I'm in Outback Key in Florida. See how I'm going to go down and see how the hurricane changed the shoreline. But it teaches a lot about the planet, and certainly there are a vast variety of birds that migrate in and out, stay down in that area. So I think a shoreline, and that Outback Key is one of my favorite shorelines.
Okay, great. Second question, were you more nervous skydiving for the first time or launching aboard the space shuttle?
Well, let's put it this way: when you launch aboard a space shuttle, you don't want to be scared, because then you can't concentrate on the checklist and you might hurt
That's
somebody
true.
else. So
Yeah.
so you're a huge professional. I think it wasn't my first dive, scuba diving, but probably about dive three. I Or parachuting, probably the not the first dive, but probably or the jump, maybe the third one, because I think by the time you get to the third one, you really understand that there is a lot more danger than you first understood.
All right. And my final question, it's about photography. Was it more difficult to take photographs aboard the space shuttle or on a helicopter?
That's a tough one, because the challenge of the two is that everything goes by so fast, and you have to be really, really prepared. But I'd say that it's really tougher in a helicopter, because at least the space shuttle is a nice smooth ride.
And you'll come back around Earth again in what, 90 minutes? You'll maybe
Yeah,
maybe in a little different spot, but
yeah, you're right about that. It's a slightly different shift, and it repeats every 40 orbits about, but it you do have to be prepared. I mean, you're going traveling 25 times the speed of sound, so that's about 5 miles a second or something. It's huge. Whereas a helicopter can, you're right, it can hover and can sort of like, I want to go back there, and it can turn around on a dime pretty much, and get you back there on target. So yeah, they both have their challenges, but I think if I had to pick one, I would probably go into space again and try different angles, different shots that haven't been taken for decades. Yeah.
I'm gonna sneak a little fourth question in there. How long did you work on the book? Just out of
Oh,
curiosity.
yeah, it's about a dozen years. I started
Wow.
photographing the whooping crane about 12 years ago, and they're difficult because there are not many of them. There are only 500 in
Sure.
the whole North America about that, and they need to be about 1,000 before they can be downlisted. But it's too like threatened. But now they're endangered, and to find them, and they when they nest, they're like you can go 25 kilometers or you can go like 15 miles before you see another pair. And so to find them, sometimes you have to recognize their footprints in the clayish kind of bottom to these ponds, these huge wetlands up that we find. They're just hard to see, and the lesser flamingo, they're easier to see, but they are very skitterish because there's so many of them, and it just takes one to get the whole flock moving in the air.
And you covered wide geographic areas. It's 2/3 of, or almost the entire continent of North America and Africa. So
Yeah,
I
I mean, coming down, I must say, coming down through Kansas and the U.S. Midwest by helicopter, a chartered helicopter, it's such a different view. It really is. I mean, people getting up in airplanes, they should always get a window seat.
you can definitely see, and you included photos of these examples of just the human impact on the environment too, especially in Kansas, where it's just the land is so fragmented with human activity, farmland especially. But
Yes, there's one space image there that I have in, and you can see the matrix of agricultural use that's straight down through the Whipping Crane corridor. But then you can see Quivira, and you can see the
right,
salt marshes, and you can see Cheyenne Bottoms for to the north of that wildlife management area. And so you can see that the whooping cranes, they're not dumb. You know, they say, oh yeah, there's some fields there. I can probably go and eat, get a few waste grains, but I got to have my roost overnight. I got to get into this salt marsh. So they really love going down and finding that place. And so far, so good. I mean, we wouldn't want to have those two areas, for example, disappear. But
sure.
when people look at these space images, it's a different way of just trying to get one's mind wrapped around vast distances.
Well, Dr. Bondar, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. The book is Space for Birds. Highly recommend obtaining a copy. Just go to your local bookseller or wherever you purchase your books. It's definitely just a fascinating read and just beautiful images, stunning images as well. So again, Dr. Bondar, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Science Headliners has been made possible by the generous donations you make to the Linda Hall Library.